All right. We're back for part 2 of our interview with Alan Toms, who served in the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam and had a military career that went on well beyond that. So we're going to pick up his story. We're going to go back and join him in Vietnam and kind of work our way from there. Okay. So you were working with helicopters with the Air Cavalry in Vietnam, and you got there in 1965 with the original division, and you were in the Drang Valley. And let's pick up, I think we'll pick up with the story kind of starting back there at that point. You got, about how long did the whole operation you were involved in last?
Well, it lasted about 2 months altogether. And what we were doing, flying in a gunship, an aircraft, a B model Huey helicopter that had for 6 machine guns and 14 rockets. We were firing fire support and covering fire and reconning by fire with these weapons. And we were in the Drang Valley, and the center of which was this large city of Pleiku. We were at different places in the Drang Valley, like that history will record, starting in Plei Mi and Plei Jurong and Plei Marang, and Plei really means a fortress type of affair, almost like a little a walled compound, walled with logs and things like that, with the area cleared around it. Like I said, we were firing support, so I wasn't on the ground but a few times. The helicopter had to land a few times, which I had described earlier. But one time when we were in a cantonment area where we were fueling up and just actually killing time, which in the military it looks like it's all action, but most of the time it's inaction. The action is a very, very small percent of any type of thing you do in the military. It is really hurry up and wait. Anyway, there was a large number of body bags, maybe about 50 yards away from where we were, maybe 100, 150, and I just inquired as to what was going on over there, and he said, well, those are people on the infantry that got hit, didn't make it, and have been waiting to be air evac out. So I said, well, I really don't want to get any closer to that than I'm already right now, because I didn't need to. I already had enough things to worry about without really seeing any more what I would call live combat up close than I already have. But I was aware that there were people from our mostly infantry platoon that were missing, and you didn't really inquire too much about that. They just packed up their things, and other people came in. It was just sort of people coming in, people going out. So anyway, that's really about as close as I wanted to come to that. We were close enough. We were 50, 100 yards off the ground in the helicopter, and I could see quite well what was going on. Just hoping that we didn't take any fire and the helicopter would have to go down, because from down we'd be in the middle of a densely jungled area, and there just wasn't anything around within sight like you could walk to or find any kind of refuge. There was just nothing. Yeah, and except what I was sure would be Viet Cong when that helicopter ever went down. They would definitely appear, or as they were known then, Pavins. Yeah.
Of course, and if you're actually crashing with a helicopter, if it's a jungle, I mean, if it's fairly substantial trees and things like that, even making it down to the surviving the crash in one piece.
It would be lucky if the helicopter could get down in most cases without being really torn up. At least the rotor's torn off, and then the helicopter is just really a thin-skinned vehicle, and the doors were wide open, and you'd be lucky to survive that. Okay. That going down in itself.
Now, were you working as a door gunner or something else?
I was working as a door gunner all the time. I sat on one side of the helicopter looking out with an M60 machine gun, and the crew chief, he looked out the other side with the machine gun, and pilot and the co-pilot were ahead, and we We had helmets on that were fitted with communications, so everything that the pilot and co-pilot were hearing and saying, I could hear.
Okay.
So that kept me well informed, and I knew what was going on as much as anybody else in a helicopter, which was always really good.
Okay. And you mentioned a little bit one of the types of missions you had was reconnaissance by fire. Can you explain how that worked?
Well, we would be directed to fire the machine guns. We usually wouldn't waste the rockets unless you had a actual hard target where we would fire the rockets. There were 14 of them. But we would just recon by fire by firing the machine guns into wooded areas or jungle areas, and the object being to flush out who would ever be there, or at least suppress them, so we could perhaps land the infantry or just provide cover for, or suppressive fire, so they could move and keep anybody else down while we were firing.
Okay. And when you conducted that kind of mission, would you get any return fire, or would they be smart enough to just stay quiet?
As far as I could tell, we didn't get any return fire. There was one time we were flying along, and it was in the area where there were suspected enemy, and there was a person on a bicycle, and he said, bring some fire on him, Toms. And I opened up with my M60, and he looked up and rode his bike under a great big tree, and I fired into the tree, and then we just passed on to the other side. So I never knew the outcome of that, but he knew that he was being fired on, because every fifth round when you fire a machine gun is a tracer, and that's how you direct the fire. You can see where you're firing, because you can see as each fifth round goes from the weapon to the ground. But I can't really say that I hit him or not.
Yeah.
So.
Now, did you actually see very many people on the ground, or were you mostly just pointing and shooting where they told you to?
I can't really say I did. We landed one time somewhere, and there was 2 Viet Cong that had been taken captive, and they were sitting there, and they looked like about 10-year-old kids sitting there in black pajamas, and it was just pathetic that they were the enemy, and it was such a big event, because they didn't look like anything but kids that hadn't eaten in a long time, and they were thinner than I was, and I'm thin, but they looked emaciated, and they didn't look well, and of course they were really worried because they had no idea what we might do to them, and our people that were there were kind of roughing them up, kind of knocking them around a bit. I wouldn't call it really hurting them and that, but they were roughing them. They had them tied up, but I just thought it was that they weren't really much of a formidable enemy, although they, of course, were a lot more formidable than how they looked.
Yeah.
Well, simply because they had a cause, and that was really, and they were a team, and I know from sports that's the driving factor, and you can be effective, and you don't need to look the role to be effective. You just have to have a decent weapon and a correct mindset, and you're dangerous. And that's probably what they were.
Okay. Of course, the Ia Drang was an area, one of the first places where you got a significant number of actual North Vietnamese soldiers coming in.
Yeah.
And did you actually see any of those yourself, or?
No, I can't actually say I did.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Well, we were in the air. We
sure.
were moving fast, and I could see some of our troops. Yeah. And then the area was well treed and jungled, and then there was what they call in the open areas elephant grass. And it was this tall grass that grew up, because we were standing in it sometime, of course, laughing. There's always a lot of laughter in the Army about how high this grass was. It was over your head, and naturally it's called elephant grass. And there was quite a bit of that. So if anybody had been lying down, I mean, you'd never see them unless they really wanted to present themselves. And the idea, of course, in being on the ground is to stay low and keep yourself concealed. Yeah, but I can't actually say that I did see them.
Right. So,
yep.
So it's very much a different experience being up there in the air above that rather than on the ground. Okay.
I did have some friends who were in the 7th Cav and were in the infantry that I was that were friends of mine in Fort Benning, and they stopped by to see me in their tent, and some of them were quite young, 18, 19. I guess they joined. I don't think they would be drafted that early. I mean, I knew that they had changed since we left Fort Benning. That they didn't have any underwear on, for one thing. We weren't wearing underpants or T-shirts or anything. And just the way they talked. They talked about being there and shooting these people with their pistol because they were crawling up. The Viet Cong were crawling up close to them at night, and these were just good time guys to have some beers with. And I know this was an experience that was just they weren't accustomed to. I don't think they even played organized sport. They were just around the school. Real nice. Very popular guys in the town, and this thing in Vietnam was really shocking to them. When they came to talk to me, I was kind of relaxed about the whole thing because I was in the air, but they were on the ground, and I could tell that they were shook up, just the way they talked to me about what had happened, because they were in the Ia Drang. That's all going on at the same time, and it was good. I had these friends in the infantry, and they were right over there, 500 yards away in the 7th Cav. And they really had quite a story to tell me. I could just see that they're just look in their faces that they were much older than when I knew them a few months before that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were semi-shocked just telling me about it. I mean, the idea that they would ever have to kill anybody, especially at close range, or die themselves. He said it was just like that. They were crawling up on them at night. He said they were almost crazy.
Okay. Now, in the places where you were based out of, did those themselves come under attack at times?
No. Well, one time we had this Hong Kong mountain there, and one time during the whole year, that was just off to the one side of the, not really in our great big perimeter, but we did have a platoon, I guess, of size group up there on top of that mountain. I mean, perhaps for communications or something. And then one night there was a lot of fire up there, and they had to beat back an attack by the Viet Cong. But they did do exactly that, and there was a big deal about that the next day. But it was at night, so there was a lot of fireworks going on, and you could see the tracers and hear it quite clearly from where we were down in our cantonment area.
But at this stage, they weren't trying to mortar the base camps or things like that?
They never did. And for the life of me, I don't know why, because we were fixed. We were sitting there in the big circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, some of it may have just been that they had less of that kind of equipment and stuff at that early stage. Later on, it was a very common thing.
It was an early stage, and I don't think that they were armed as heavily as they were later, as I was reading about it. Yeah, they even had tanks later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Now, how dangerous would you say your duty was? I mean, if you're in the helicopters, how much of a risk was there at that stage of getting hit or shot down?
I can't say I was actually afraid. I had gone to airborne school and jumped out of an airplane, and that was probably more unnerving than being in that helicopter. But I just knew that there wasn't anything I could do once the helicopter lifted off. I was just going to be there, but all the time I was there, I was looking continuously for a target of opportunity or anything that appeared, that would be worth shooting at. But most of the time I was figuring what I was going to do and had my stuff on my body. And what I was going to do if the helicopter went down. I had a plan, because I had my .45 pistol on me, and I was going to grab this M16, which was laying in the floor of the helicopter, and I always had my canteen full and all my stuff, and even a few chocolate bars to exist on, because I knew right away if the helicopter went down, my first move would be to get away from the helicopter as quick as possible, and then to defend the helicopter and the crew, because I would know the condition of the other people if I was still able to move against whoever had shot us down. Was take up some kind of fire. I wanted to make sure I had that M16, which was laying in the floor, that I would jump off, and I had a little safety belt around my waist that buckled to the floor so I wouldn't fall forward out of the helicopter in case it ever dipped. And I had that figured out how I'd extricate myself from that real fast so I could jump off the helicopter and move real quick away from there with all my stuff with me that I would have. So I had everything on. Mm-hmm. I certainly had a plan that I wouldn't reach for my steel pot. I would keep the helmet on that I had because it wouldn't be time for that. So I had a plan all the time for what I was going to do as soon as the helicopter hit the ground.
Okay, but you never had to use it?
No, I never did. The only time it ever did go down when I was on it was when the hydraulics failed, and they might have failed because they had taken some fire, mm-hmm. and because the helicopter is controlled entirely by hydraulics, and when it went down, we just bounced. We weren't in a what I would call a hot area. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really any danger of that.
Right.
The biggest danger was to get the helicopter down without it crashing.
Right.
And the pilot did an excellent job of that. Mr. Green was his name. Yeah, good guy from UCLA.
Okay.
Anyway, he did get it down. Yeah.
All right. Now, after sort of you have there's 2 months where the Iraq campaign is kind of going on actively. Did you then stay in the same region for a while longer after that, or did they move you someplace else?
We after that ended, we went to some other places called one was Plagerang, which I think is north of Pleiku, and then we started going over by the coast, over to the Bang Son area, and firing support there for the infantry, and going in and firing suppressive fire while these lift ships would drop off all these infantry. And the only incident I could remember there very well was that we heard over the radio that one of our Jeeps, and it's not like the war we have now where we have IEDs and everything. Mm-hmm. We were just driving around thin-skinned vehicles like Jeeps, just like you see on the road today, except we were soldiers sitting in them. And they said that one of our Jeeps had hit a mine, and we weren't very far away from it, so the captain said, we're going to go and check this out. And we flew over there, and I thought, what's a Jeep look like that hits a mine? But when we got there, there was just a big black circle, and there was a tire laying there. And that's all that was left. That's just a tire. It was a big open area. It wasn't like it was in the woods or anything like that, like it would be blown off in the brush. It was out, wide open area, and that was all that was there, was that tire and a big burn spot on this road.
So it would have been an anti-tank mine or an artillery shell? Or?
It must have been something pretty big, because it wasn't, we looked and looked, and they just said, where is the rest of it? Mm-hmm. And there wasn't. There was a couple of people in the Jeep. That's the story of my Vietnam, being around very close, but I can't actually say I didn't get a Purple Heart. So.
All right. Was the coastal area there, was that a less dangerous or heavily contested area than what you'd been in before?
No, that was quite dangerous too. I just remember it didn't look any different than being in Florida and what it would be up in the air if you were off of Pompano Beach or Fort Lauderdale. It was a beautiful coast, except the Vietnamese, they don't swim, and the beaches were empty. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when we were in the air, you could see the beach from Bang Son.
Okay. Yeah. Now, was this an area that had farms or rice paddies, or what was it?
That's what it was. It was heavily farmed. I grow a lot of tapioca. They have these little round white beads, and they're drying them on these circular mats, and it was kind of interesting. But we did go out with the 2 helicopters and landed out in the middle of some rice paddies in the middle of the afternoon. And there was people coming around us, curiosity seekers, Vietnamese farmers and that, and I didn't really like that, because I thought anybody's carrying anything, they'll just blow these helicopters to smithereens, and we'll be standing right here. There wasn't any cover whatsoever. One amusing thing or interesting thing I knew I was in the third world was there was a little boy that walked up. They didn't get too close to helicopters because I was out keeping them away. About 5 years old, walked up there and was just standing there looking. He just had, everybody was barefoot and just had a little pair of shorts on. But the interesting thing was he was smoking a cigarette. And I thought, what a place. 5 years old, he's standing there looking at me. And they were all quacking away. You know, their language is really quite different than anything I'd ever heard. But then we didn't leave. We stayed there, and it started to get dark, and I thought, are we going to get out of here and go to get some security? And we stayed there all night, and with those helicopters sitting right out there and wide open, and these people had been here in the daytime, and as far as I was concerned, you really couldn't trust anybody, and usually you have guard 2 hours on, 4 hours off all night long, so we had a guard for each helicopter, but I just remember when I was on guard, it was terrifying because we were so vulnerable. And to this day, I don't know why we were sitting out there, why we would leave those helicopters out there.
Did you have infantry with you, or was it just the helicopter crews?
The helicopters were just sitting there. I couldn't see anything except those the only people we saw outside our crew were the Vietnamese. And there was adults, women, kids. They were doing something in these paddies. Mm-hmm. Which went as far as I could see in every direction. And I don't even know how they found a flat place to land a helicopter, but they did. But I thought we were really vulnerable.
Yeah.
I was so glad when it started to get light. I was glad it was summer in the, well, it wasn't quite summer, it was spring then. And I was glad it got light and we could lift off and get out of there. Nothing happened.
Yeah.
It was just, but I thought, if I were them, there's 2 helicopters we could have had. It was terrible.
Yeah, maybe it was so unexpected that they didn't have a plan for that one.
They weren't. They sure weren't. They were elsewhere.
All right.
We were lucky.
Yeah. Now, did you get a lot of the Vietnamese civilians on the bases where you were working?
Yeah, there was civilian workers, but they were always supervised. But I don't know by whom. I never had that detail. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there would be hundreds of them on certain construction projects, drainage. A lot of it for drainage because we did have so much rain there. Because that was another event. I was cold. I actually thought at night I wished I had taken my long underwear with me. I thought I know I'm in Vietnam. But when that rainy season came and my clothes and things got damp, wet, that it was hard to keep warm, especially at night.
Okay. When the monsoon hit, were you up in the hills or were you down in the coastal area?
Well, we were at An Cay, flying everything out of An Cay.
Okay.
Through that, the rainy season is really over the Christmas season and over that winter, and it got cold. I didn't have to wear a field jacket except when I was on guard at night, but it was cold. I was glad when the sun did come up. The thing is that it doesn't rain all the time. It just rains in the afternoon and then at night, and then it's hard to keep things dry.
Right.
Hard to dry things out.
And was there a big temperature difference between day and night when that happened?
No, not so bad. Well, because it is jungle. It's not a desert. A desert it would be much more because of the heat would radiate away from the earth. But this was the jungle, and the type of ground it was maintained the heat. It was cold, but not really so bad. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but being wet, that was the problem. Could have had 2 pairs of boots. And we didn't have any. We just had regular fatigues, regular boots. We were there first, Army, but we had combat boots, just like we had in Germany, and we didn't have jungle boots. We didn't have jungle fatigues or anything special at all.
Did any of the clothing of the boots wear out or rot or anything like that?
No. We would smart enough to keep things rotated, and that's what you learn in basic training, is to rotate your footgear every day, and it was a good idea, and dry out your socks and how to do all that. Yeah, the training on that is training I'm using today. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, were you there for sort of a full 12 months? Or?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And over the course of that time, did you get much turnover within your unit?
Yeah, we did. We got some people in later that were trouble, and that's when the drugs started, just as I was leaving. Up to that point, I never ever, we would have, there would be beer, but I didn't really want to drink beer.
Mm-hmm.
I was just sitting around the tent drinking beer. I drink beer, but I like to be in a nice atmosphere. I didn't want to be sitting there in Vietnam drinking beer. So anyway, there was drugs, and then there was isolated incidents of fragging that I'd heard about in the division, and even after I left, there was some in the 9th Cav, and there were some real troublemakers that came into the 9th Cav, and there were some vicious fights, and I knew that the people we had, which were really good soldiers, I knew when these new people came in, I was glad to be getting out of there. And I was one of the first ones to leave, and then I got letters from my friends, and they said those guys really caused problems, and they didn't fit in with the good soldiers that we had there before. They were draftees
Mm-hmm.
out of the cities in America, and they were really trouble. And I was glad to get out of there.
Yeah. Well, were a fair number of them black, or were they all kinds?
They were city, and a good number of them were black. Great athletes. We had a volleyball, and that stretched up. We had the greatest volleyball game. Those guys could play. They were great athletes. Anyway, they brought some big city problems along with them. They weren't really good soldiers. They didn't know anything about soldiering at all. They were trouble.
And did they just have sort of a basic training and then get sent out, do you suppose? Or?
No. They had to go through AIT. But in a Cav outfit, a Cav outfit gets just a lot of misfits, people that really don't have anything to do with that MOS, military occupation specialty. Like all the tankers that were there were never in a Cav outfit and have nothing to do with the infantry or reconnaissance, also known as scouts.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have anything to do with any of that. They just kind of fitted in. And these units were just molded from a lot of other people, but it wasn't that tough to pick up the type of job or to learn those weapons. And these other people just didn't have very much of a military background. I had about 3.5 years in the Army when I went to Vietnam. And I'd been in a very good unit and learned a lot from that and studied a lot of military things. I knew they didn't know anything.
Right. So
but they didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because this is also a period when the draft boards are still largely responsible for deciding who goes from what area and what quotas. And at times they were using the draft as a way of clearing out people they thought were undesirables from different areas too.
It was, yeah. Yeah, it was. It was. You got a lot of college people. You had a higher. I was able to find people who were well-read, really educated people when you had the draft, and that was a lesser of a situation after the draft ended.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found plenty of people to associate with and talk with, and I learned a lot from. Sure. Yeah.
So a certain number of the draftees were people who did wind up making at least reasonably good soldiers in one level or another.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, that's what the Army is. The Army is the best, like America. It's the best and worst of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember that there were some people who were the greatest humorists. There was so much. I mean, there was terrible times. You thought you were going to go, crazy just with these associations. People who were just mean, but there was so much good times and people who were really humorous. It was just astonishing how talented these people were. They were really something. So you really had the best and the worst.
Right.
Yeah.
During your year in Vietnam, did you get any leave time or furlough or anything like that?
Yeah. They had R&R, rest and recuperation, and they had Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, I don't know if he went to Seoul. Some people even went to Hawaii. They flew them there. And I thought a lot of that was waste. Even in the military, I was wondering, even then, at that young age, mid-20s, where the money was going. When somebody said they were flying people to Hawaii, I thought, bad idea. Anyway, he said, you come down on the R&R, Toms. I said, okay. So, and I had an idea that popped into my mind. I said, where is it? They said, Vung Tau. I said, Vung Tau. I said, where's that? And I'm a geography minor. And they said, it's down there by Saigon. It's a coastal resort. It's an R&R center. I said, okay. I said, 3 days. Everybody else got a week. And in Hong Kong or Taiwan or Singapore. And they also went to Sydney.
Yeah, someone to Australia, yeah.
They went to us, that's right. There's another one. They went to Sydney. So I went to Vung Tau. Great place. The most beautiful beaches you just could ever imagine. And it was a resort city for the Vietnamese and for the French, and it was absolutely beautiful. Couldn't have been any better. And they had a city with markets and just it was really exciting. It was a wonderful 3 days.
So did it kind of feel like at least there wasn't really a war on?
Yeah, entirely. I got in a Ciclo it's a rickshaw type of fare, but it's being powered by a person on a bicycle. And he just loved me, being light. And he took me for miles out on the beach, and I went to a big restaurant out on the beach and sat out there and drank beer and sat and got a nice suntan. And I met some guys. We're down there in R&R, and then I wasn't married, and we found some girls, and they went with us out to the beach, and it was just the greatest time. I had a lot of pictures of it. And it was just a really nice time. Met some good guys, some GIs, and they liked having a lot of fun. Stayed at a hotel there that it was open rooms and 5 or 6 people. Plenty of room, very airy. You could look out on these beautiful gardens and everything. It wasn't your private room or anything. It was just kind of open area there with a lot of beds and here and there. It was really, really nice. It was wonderful. Then later I did put in for a leave, and I went to Hong Kong with a guy, Rudy Johnson was his name, from Denver, and he was a black guy, and he was well educated. In fact, there was only one Rudy Johnson. He was a doctor in Denver, and my daughter lives there, and I have written it down. I'm going to go and call that number next fall when I go out to see my daughter. I'm going to ask him if you are the same Rudy Johnson. Anyway, when we were in Hong Kong, we ran out of money, and so I wired. I called my father on the phone in Grand Rapids, told him to send him $600 of my money from my bank account. And he said, okay. I told him I was in Kowloon, part of it was Hong Kong Island, and the mainland is Kowloon. So he wired the money, and I gave Rudy some, and then I gave him $170, and he said he'd pay me back. Anyway, we had a great time in Hong Kong. We took a tour, and we met some girls in a bar, and she said, did you want to go to the new territories? So I actually got on a Chinese train and went on the mainland of China and went to, in the New Territories is what it was called. It was all English owned then, and went to a Buddhist monastery. And we spent the whole day there and had lunch and came back on the train, and I thought for me and a girl in the bar, I was paying, but it wasn't a great amount, and we paid for the train fare, and we had a nice day. And it was a lot of fun. And then I left Vietnam, just talking about going to Hong Kong. Anyway, when I was back in Michigan, I got a letter from Rudy. It was $170. And he said, this should restore your faith in humanity. So I thought that was pretty good.
All right. Now, as you got toward did you know when your time was going to run out, when they were going to send you back to the States, or did you?
No, the whole thing was when the ship landed, we had thousands and thousands of GIs that had the same rotation day. We'd spend a year, we'd all be leaving on the same day. So some left early and some left late. I left early.
Okay.
Yep. But nobody knew. Nobody had any idea. You didn't want to start. You had no sense asking the platoon sergeant because he didn't know. And it just came down like everything does from headquarters, which is up in the sky, you know.
Because later on in the war, people knew how long their tour was going to be, and they're counting down the days, but you really didn't know how long
No,
they were going
because
to
the
be there.
division all got there roughly in the same time period, the same 1 week. And we all just descended on the place, all kinds of ships, and we all had the same rotation day.
Right.
So we couldn't leave on the same day. So it was staggered.
Okay. So how much advance notice would you get before you left?
Oh, 2 or 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, before we take you out of Vietnam, are there other particular things that you remember about that experience or that kind of stay with you that we want to?
Well, I was gambling, and I was I hadn't lost the whole entire time I was there. I won $1,700, which was I only made $210 in a month. So I had that in my duffel bag because there was no bank. I was terrified. I had it in a copy of Death of a Salesman, as a matter of fact, the book I had in my duffel bag, and I was worried somebody would go in there and cut that bag open and take my money because they knew I had won. It was card games, and the company commander was in the game, and me, I was a Spec 5. You know, anyway, it was an honorable thing. I won the money. Then the day before I was leaving, there was a guy who wanted to flip quarters with me, and I said, well, anyway, I won't lose. And I flipped down one. I took a lot of money off of him, too. Then, anyway, that was my last official act. We flew from there to Pleiku, where the C-141 would take you from there back to the States. And then, before that, though, you got on the 141. There was about 200 and some of us all out there in this open dirt area. So then he said, open up your AWOL bag, because that's all you could have, was an AWOL bag and a duffel bag, and dump everything out on the ground. So there was 200 of us after I had that bag packed, just the way I wanted it. And I'd dump it out in this red soil, which is Pleiku. Dump it all out, and then they'd come through and go through all your stuff, make sure that you didn't take any gradu or contraband, or, as they call it, and back to the States. And I had nothing because after a year I didn't want any trouble. I didn't try to smuggle anything. I just wanted to get on the 141 and lift. And so then I packed all the stuff up with a share of red dirt, and we got on the plane. And the plane flew to Japan first for something, and then it flew to the Clark Air Base in the Philippines for something. But that was a Spec 5. And anyway, then finally it landed at Traverse Air Force Base, just outside San Francisco. So, and I was in uniform, walked through that airport in 1966. Nobody said anything to me. I thought, well, after being in Vietnam and just living living outside for an entire year, this was really, I was so excited I couldn't believe it. So anyway, but no one said anything to me or gave me any hard looks or anything, and I had my uniform on, and had my first cab patch on that uniform.
Yeah. Well, in '66, the anti-war movement was not what it would become later.
It wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't. No, that came later. No, it was. I got a taxi, found myself a hotel, stayed there about 2 days. Went to some night spots in San Francisco. Met a couple of people, and they took me in their car to some clubs that they had recommended, and treated me treated me great. Total strangers, and met a guy who was out, had an argument with his wife, and he was out for a drink, and we got talking, and he took me to some great places, and I would never know of in San Francisco. I had a great time, and then I flew back to Michigan for my leave, I guess about 10 days leave. I never want to take a great amount of leave at home. I take a short amount, and then I'd take my leaves in places like Hong Kong or places in Europe. I didn't want to just sit around Grand Rapids. A week with the family was enough.
Okay. Now, at this point, I mean, were you planning on staying in the Army for a long period of time?
Yeah, because I had to re-enlist in order to go to this OCS.
Right.
So I had a 6-year commitment, so I probably had about 4.5 years left.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I was going to stay in, and I was kind of worried because I was a Spec 5 and not really no prospects of promotion. Promotion really came slow, even though I didn't know it. Because I was an armor and the war had started, promotions were really coming fast. But I didn't know about this because I was a Spec 5 and I was not kept informed. That's all. I just didn't know a great amount. But then with my new assignment, then was to Fort Campbell, I said, we're going to put you up before a promotion board to E6. I didn't even have, I had a few years in grade as E5. I went before that promotion board, and as I've said before, I studied military subjects, and I came out of that board knowing if they're promoting, I made it.
Yep.
And I did. I made E6, and I did real well with that board because I'd gone before Soldier of the Month boards, and I'd been to Vietnam, and I was well read, and I flew through that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, we need people to go to drill sergeant school, has to be voluntary, Fort McClellan, Alabama. I said, yeah, let's do that, because I was still feeling bad about not going through this OCS thing and finishing it. And I said, yeah, let's do that and be a drill sergeant. I went down there and Fort McClellan. There was about maybe 80 of us. Top 10% were honor graduates. Somehow I graduated 6th, and I was an honor graduate. I graduated in the top %.
What did the actual training for that consist of?
Well, what they teach you there is how to teach basic training. In so many words, you have to memorize the Drill and Ceremonies Manual, which is 22-5. You have to memorize it, every single word, because you will teach it exactly like the manual states it. And I did that, and so did most of the other people. And then all the subjects that you teach in basic training, physical training, how to give that, how to teach it. In addition, you learned it while you were doing it. The drills and ceremonies, rifle, protective mask, gas mask for civilians, infiltration course, all the military subjects, everything that you teach in 8 weeks to a trainee, we were taught with the emphasis being on that we would have to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. When I graduated from there, went directly to a basic training battalion at Fort Campbell, and where I was given a job as platoon sergeant. I had 2 E6s as my assistants, and was given, we filled, which means we got troops from the reception center. We got 60 each platoon. It was 4 platoons, 60 trainees in each platoon, and 30 upstairs and 30 downstairs, and I lived in the barracks with them in a small room. But they were good enough when I wanted to take a shower, they wouldn't be in the shower. But I waited until later in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
So it was they were cooperative. And
now, how was it that you wound up as a platoon sergeant?
well, there were. I had only a month time and grade rank-wise, and there was a number of sergeants there. There were 2 other E6s, and they said, well, there was only one position for 1 platoon sergeant, so who wants to do it? And since I had the lowest rank, I just sat mute, and the other 2 said, let Toms do it. And the first sergeant or the CO, I don't remember who was doing the talking, said, do you want to do it, Toms? And I said, okay with me. They said, okay, you guys will be Toms assistants even though you do outrank him. They said, fine with us. And it was Sergeant Priest and Sergeant Cox, and we just had the greatest relationship.
Now, why do they want you to do it?
Well, there is a lot of responsibility. You get the praise when things go right. And you've got to get 60 trainees to do what you want them to do most of the time. And if it doesn't go well, then you'll be called to account. And but my job was to distribute tasks to the 2E6s, and as well as run the platoon, and in essence take charge of that 60-man platoon.
Okay.
But that was easy because I knew everything. Because I'd been to drill sergeant school, and they knew nothing. And a lot of those guys were college graduates and fantastic athletes. I had a couple of guys that maxed the PT test and were just really heavy, but they were great soldiers and they were great people.
Okay. Well, now were these mostly draftees now, or about half and half?
About half and
enlistees?
half.
Okay. And in general, what attitude did they bring in with them when they came in?
They were good attitude. Couple of troublemakers, not even what I would call bad troublemakers. Not very few.
But just cut-ups or guys who like to make trouble, just kind of do it.
That was fine with me. I loved the humor in the military.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the standard cliches or assumptions about sort of drill sergeants is that they really kind of deliberately mess with the minds of the recruits and so forth. And how much of that kind of thing were you doing, or what kinds of things would you do to try to take them out of being individuals and make them soldiers?
Well, I didn't like. Well, I had been in a fraternity when I was a student at Western Michigan University, and I thought that they overdid it, just trying to be mean, and I thought they overdid the fact that they had you in their charge, and they did things that I thought were unnecessary and were mean. And when I was a low-ranking person in the military, there was a lot of those same things, and I thought that won't happen if I ever get any rank. And I cursed. In fact, there was so much swearing, it just became insignificant. That was just how people talked in the military, and that was just how I talked. And I know it shocked them, but it got their attention. And but I didn't, except for a couple of things which I'm still not really happy about that happened. There are a couple of incidents which I remember very, very distinctly. For the most part, I never really, what I would call, messed with anybody. I just tried to get them to do, either coerce them or yell at them or swear at them, and they would usually come around, or shame them, because the thing that made it good was Vietnam was on, and there was a good chance they were going there. And I would say, if you mess up here, you can think of how it's going to be when it's real. This is training, and pretty soon it's going to be real. You'll be sorry then, and that always held. That really made it good.
So your approach basically was to be straight with them.
I was straight with them, and they knew, since I lived in the barracks, this wasn't just a part-time thing. They saw me in there spit shining my boots, and they were down there spit shining their boots. They would come in, knock on my door, come in there, and they were continuously had 1 million questions, and there were 60 of them. But they tried not to bother me too much, and it was fair. But I would give them classes and help them in the evening with various things. And,
now, how long did you have that assignment?
for 2.5 years. That was basic training.
So that's then into 68, 69? How long?
It was went up through 66, 67, through 68.
Okay. Did the atmosphere change at all in that time? Because you get farther into the war, there's more casualties, there's more protesting or things like that.
There were more protesting. As I was reading the newspaper, that's when they had the big march on Washington. That's when Martin Luther King was speaking. And I saw all that.
Was it affecting the recruits?
I was in favor of the war, simply because prior to the war, I was watching the spread of communism across Europe, through and we already had China and Russia, and through the Central and even into South America. And even our campuses had what I would consider, they weren't communist, that was too old, but they were militant groups of people that, in so many words, they were anarchists. I saw the spread of that. So the fact that Vietnam was going on and things, I was against this movements, and I never knew anybody in the military, and I was sort of a liberal in the military. I liked long hair, and I never knew anybody that was thought different than I did. Mm-hmm. We were all against all these protests and that.
Yeah, and I guess what I was asking about a little bit was sort of the attitude or the behavior, the morale of the recruits themselves, does that change from when you started as a drill sergeant to by the time you finished?
They didn't become more militant. Mm-hmm. They subverted their personal views because they knew, just like when I was on the helicopter, they weren't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. That they were going to be there, and they were going to do that, and their lot would just be a lot harder if they made us mad, and it would be so needless anyway, because we were all on this train, and we were all going the same direction. I said, you can make it easy or make it hard, but we're all going to be doing this every day, and we can get along together.
Now, while you were there doing that stint as a drill instructor, did you expect that they might send you back to Vietnam for another tour?
No. I thought but we had an enormous army then, and there were enough replacements, and there was plenty of people that hadn't been yet. Mm-hmm. Not everybody was a Vietnam veteran that was a drill sergeant. There was plenty of people, and then as it turned out, I got orders for Germany, and then I thought before I get back from Germany that war will be over, and then I did go to Germany, and it was over.
All right. Where do they send you in Germany?
Well, I went to a place called Bad Hersfeld, which is up on the East German border. Their main mission is to be the first line of defense against the East German and the Russian army, because we were about 20 kilometers from the border. Mm-hmm. Then we would go on patrols up into what's known as the 5-kilometer zone, and there are no American soldiers allowed within that zone except people who are assigned to go there on these patrols, and that's really what I did.
Okay. And what unit were you with at that time?
Well, initially I was with the 11th Cavalry in I Troop, and whose headquarters was in a place called Fulda. It's known as an ancient invasion route from the east, known as the Fulda Gap, right. And that's where, because it is a low mountainous region, but that would be where large masses of armored vehicles like the Russians and the Warsaw Pact nations possessed would come through in that portion of Germany, where it is rather low mountainous. Mm-hmm. I was in the 11th Cavalry, or the let me see. It was 11th Cavalry. No, it was the 14th Cavalry. Let me make a correction on it. Initially, it was the 14th Cavalry, and like I said, the headquarters at Fulda. Then they changed it, and we became the 11th Cavalry, and it was known as the Black Horse Cavalry. And they had a shoulder patch with a black horse. Those were the two. I think I got them initially turned around. Right. Anyway, but I was still in I Troop. They didn't change the name of that, and it was a platoon where I was our platoon had an infantry section, a tank section of 3 tanks, of which I was the head of the tank section. Mm-hmm. Those 3 tanks, infantry section, and then they had a scout section, had 2 114s, which was a poor vehicle because it kept breaking down. And that's where the platoon sergeant, who was in E7, that's where he rode when we went out in the field. But the tank section, they just followed along when we would go out to the field, and we would just go here and sit, go there and sit. We really had no mission. So I told the platoon sergeant, since he was in 1114, which I said is a sorry vehicle.
Was that an armored personnel carrier?
It's an armored personnel carrier. It's a small one. A 113 is about at least a third as much bigger, And the 113 is just great. That's where the infantry squad was in the 113.
Okay.
The scouts were in the 114, and it was a sort of kind of a chopped down version of the 113. But I said, why don't you just put me in the 113, and I'll be the recon man, and I've got so-and-so can take care of the tank section. I had some other assistant NCOs who could take care of that and move the tank from point A to point B. And then this was a lot more exciting because I was out in front. I would make initial contact with the enemy, and who were our own troops, but they were aggressors. It was all practice.
Right.
And then I would be calling in spot reports, and that actually would be a lot more exciting. I just have a lot more to do. So that's what I did when we went to the field. Then when we went to tank gunnery, I would go back on my tank.
What kind of tanks did you have?
We had M60s,
Okay.
straight M60s, not M60A1s, or just straight M60s. Yeah, there were 3 of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what was the base facility like there that you were on?
Well, it was right on the edge of the city of Bad Hersfeld. As soon as you went out the front gate, which was guarded by Americans, it was a former German army garrison in the Second World War and even the First World War, I think, judging by our barracks. And I did live in the barracks. I wasn't married. It was right next to the town, and you could walk out of there into the town, down the hill and into the town. So it was quite close. And then on the next hill that we could actually see them was a German Bundeswehr post. And I had gone over there to compete in some athletic events. I went over there, they had a track meet, I went over there and competed.
Okay. What kind of treatment did the Germans give you while you were there?
Oh, a lot of Germans worked on post. When they were renovating our barracks, they said that I could live off post, so I did. I went and lived I found an apartment with a woman who worked at the PX, and I lived there. It was very nice. We would go down into the town and to restaurants around there when we had time off. And there was German. We had an NCO club that was just before we had the big scandal where the sergeant major of the army was taking the money from the slot machines and keeping it himself. The NCO clubs were really a great place. They had a live band, and they were just a lot of fun. A lot of Germans. They were all invited. The place was just full of Germans, and they just had a great time. They could eat. They'd come in here and they could eat in our restaurant at the NCO club, and it was very nice. There was just great relations between them. One thing I did was I was starting to take. I always was taking lots of trips. I'd go to Amsterdam from there and drive. But then I started taking my car and going up to Hamburg, and then I met a German girl, and I did get married while I was stationed in Bad Hersfeld. But I couldn't get married, as the chaplain advised us, in Germany because of the status of forces agreement. You couldn't marry a German girl because then she would be a dependent of the United States, and we weren't going to pay for that. So he said, go to Switzerland. So I did. I went to Basel, and we got married in Basel. And then I came back up, and we had another marriage ceremony in a church in Hamburg, and a reception in a big hall where all of her relatives from northern Germany were there, and plus I was there with my best man and another gunner off one of the tanks. There it was at my wedding. It was really a nice thing.
Okay. Were you based at Bad Hersfeld the whole time you were in Germany that time?
Yeah, I was stationed there for 3 years.
Okay. Okay. Now, this is a period also where in Europe you have radical movements developing, and there are various kinds of protests and other stuff going on, including some stuff directed back toward the American military in the Vietnam War. Did you see any of that or have any awareness of it?
Well, we had the Baader-Meinhof group. It was very dangerous, and these things were going on while I was in Germany. And it was the 60s. and Jimi Hendrix, and who was the other one, the woman that died?
Janis Joplin.
Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix were playing in Frankfurt. Who knew?
Mm-hmm.
Today, why didn't I go to Frankfurt and see it? I did go to Frankfurt, though, and see Jethro Tull.
Mm-hmm.
But they were there, and it was. I just loved the music. I should have gone there, but there was problems. We had a newspaper called the Overseas Weekly, and we knew some actually radical Germans who grew up with my wife in Hamburg.
Mm-hmm.
The girl did, and the other guy he used to be in the army, but they worked as reporters for the Overseas Weekly, and they came down to do a story in Bad Hersfeld, and they came to the headquarters and asked for me, and everybody was really shook up at the Post because this newspaper went all over Europe each week,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody was reading it. And so they were going to do a special on Bad Hersfeld. And that. So they came down there, and I went with them up on the border, and they did a story. But little parts of it appeared in the Overseas Weekly, but it wasn't the big thing that they thought it was going to be. But these people were quite radical people. They had radical literature. I went to their apartment when they lived in. They lived in Frankfurt a good portion of the time, and they had a lot of really radical things that I'd seen, and they were using drugs, and it was me being a soldier associating with them was risky.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the fact that the girl was in school with my wife.
Right.
They both went to school, and she lived about a block from where my wife lived, in a bombed out area of Hamburg.
Mm-hmm.
Which my wife said we used to play on the piles of debris when they were kids. And it was her name was Svetlana, and she was a radical, and so was her husband, and so were their friends. But I was just 26, and
Mm-hmm.
no, I wasn't 26. I was close to 30, and it was in the 60s, and it was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I just had to be very careful. Don't get too close,
Right.
and just observe,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I did.
But on the whole, most of the German population was not particularly hostile or...
Oh no, they were recovering during those years. I didn't know it so much, but very rapidly from the war.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting richer and richer and building and developing their industries,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a booming thing. And now they've reached a position of preeminence in the world, but at that time they were really building and really industrious. Yeah.
Was there much concern either on the German parts or the military's part that at some point the Soviets might actually attack, or was the assumption...
Oh,
going to
yeah.
be, okay.
And the reason was because things were going badly there. So either they were going to attack soon, or they would have to give it up. So we were always really ready and expecting some things to happen.
Things were going badly. What did you mean by that?
Going badly economically in Russia. They got, I guess that was in the 80s. Yeah, came later. Was that Afghanistan thing? But
yeah.
Their economy, we knew it was going bad. During the war in Israel, the Russians were supplying the Arab nations with tanks, T-62s,
Mm-hmm.
and we would go to tank gunnery down at a place called Grafenburg, where the old Wehrmacht used to have their gunnery. That's where they had the armor school, and they had a T-62 tank there, and I had an occasion to go through this tank. Well, I never saw anything so primitive in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It really was it was a 105, maybe 122 millimeter gun, huge gun, but the tank itself was it wasn't really a tank that you could fight out of. It was just a platform to
Mm-hmm.
carry this gun
Mm-hmm.
and these other two machine guns that they had. It was just nothing. A lot of the interior of the tank was made out of wood, which was, even our old tanks I started out on, the 48s, didn't have anything made out of wood. But this was such a primitive thing, and that's when I thought, I actually felt sorry for them. And this was their best tank, the T-62, which it was at that time. The TCF-72s came later. But then I of course, did a lot of reading. And then when I knew that they were having problems over there, and then of course it increased as time went on.
Yeah. I guess part of it was that by this time, because of the kind of economic recovery and rebuilding that had gone on in West Germany, the gap in terms of standard of living and so forth between East and West was becoming pretty apparent.
It did. It did, and it didn't really become so apparent until I later on was stationed in Berlin, and I got to go over to the East and see how things really were there. And then, as far as I was concerned, the truth was out. That they were not what they professed to be. It was not Khrushchev saying, we'll bury you, and we had to worry about it. They didn't have the capability to bury us.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So you're at Bad Hersfeld, you get married and so forth. Then when do you finish there?
Oh, in 1970, I got orders to go back to Fort Knox, and I was going to be assigned to drill sergeant there, which I was. I was given my own platoon, and these people were through basic training, and they were coming to this battalion for armor training, because that's where the armor school is. So people who went through their 8 weeks, then went on for their second 8 weeks of training, and we would teach them armor subjects, mainly tank driving, where we actually taught them how to drive the tanks, and they drove the tanks, tank communications, tank radios, how to talk on the radio, and then tank gunnery. And we actually went there and fired the 105 millimeter guns, and put them through that, and then gave them the test. And after 8 weeks, they graduated.
All right. Now you're married. So did you bring your wife with you back to the States?
My wife came back to the States, and she started going to school there. She was at least the equivalent of a high school graduate here, but they're in Germany, but they wouldn't recognize it in America, so she had to go out to Elizabethtown, 20 miles south of Fort Knox, and to get her GED, and she did that, and then she went later on to university, and now has a master's degree, and she's a retired teacher.
Okay.
So,
how easy or hard was it for her to adjust to living over here?
Oh, she's a pretty flexible person, and she was well educated, and she actually had been married before to an American, and she had a son who was 4 when I married her, which I didn't bring out, but his name was Torsten, and he didn't speak any English, so it was, he and I spoke German, and then when he started going to school, then he started learning English. But she didn't have much problem. She was in the GED thing, courses, and then she did very well in there. She really was a good student, and she had to take all those GED classes, and she went there, and they usually take one of those tests per day, but she went there and she took the whole series in about 6 hours of testing, and she did real well in that. And she did get her GED, but it was quite a shock that she would be taking them all in one day. And then she took a couple of courses there at the Education Center to start her college work. And actually our company commander was in the same course that she took a course in logic, and the company commander was in the captain, and he was in the same course, and he was getting with her on some of this logic work because it was too difficult. He needed someone with a more open mind to help him with the logic, with the logic course. So she was actually helping him.
Okay, so he was an officer, but he didn't have a college degree at that point?
He did, but he was taking further courses, I guess, for a master's degree.
Okay.
Yep, yeah, he did.
So. All right. Now, how were the men you were working with in training in Fort Knox here? How were they different from the ones that you'd had back at Fort Campbell?
They were good, and but they weren't as intimidated because now they'd been through 8 weeks and they kind of knew the game. So you had to treat them more like soldiers and men, and there wasn't the swearing and things, and on the weekend they were usually free. In basic, they weren't even allowed to leave the barracks for 6 weeks unless you marched to the PX. And that was it. But here they were allowed to have their families there and go places, and it was more freedom for us too. But it was entirely different.
Okay. Now, did you still have draftees, or were we now getting into all
Draftees were there.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
That's still
we
going
still
on.
had plenty of them.
Was their attitude toward being in the military really any different from what it had been earlier?
No, it didn't. I can't say that we had a lot of troublemakers. But, once again, Vietnam was closing down, but they knew they were going to be assigned to an armor company somewhere. So I can't say that there was much problem. There was a few incidents where I had to try to get somebody's attention. I had to try to use my rank and try to scare them into doing what they were supposed to do. They were more smart-mouthed than they used to be. So I had to assert my rank and, in essence, try to scare them. Yeah.
Now, if they were in armor, was an expectation that probably they'd be more likely to wind up in Europe than in Vietnam?
Right. Armor is mainly in Europe. Even if you're assigned to a tank company in the States, it's nothing like the real army in Europe, where we have massive, huge posts with 10,000 soldiers and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tanks and line units, infantry, artillery, and tanks, and it's the real thing there. Yeah, and you just have a better line of group of soldiers there. They don't have their families a lot apart. They're not going home. They don't all have cars and a million problems. It's just most of them live in the barracks, which I did for 8 years until I got married, and then I could live in housing. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, how long did the Fort Knox assignment last?
Oh, that was about 2.5 years too. Then I applied for and got, even though it was tough, I got what's known as a permission to go to Western Michigan University and what was known as the bootstrap program. If you could complete within 18 months, they would send you to a university. If you got a letter from the university saying that you could complete within 18 months, they would send you and your family to that university and complete that. So I did go there to Kalamazoo, Michigan, the school that I, in essence, flunked out of, and completed my degree in 18 months, in which the lowest grade I got was a B+. So I only got 1 B, everything else was an A.
So you had learned some discipline somewhere along the way.
Yeah. And my wife started going too, and she was a home economics and a German major. So she got a 4-year degree, minus 2 courses in 2 years. She was taking 21 credit hours, and I was taking about 16 or 17. But it was I didn't get to take just the regular courses that a person getting that degree would, because I had been out for a number of years. I was 34 years old, and I started college when I was 18. Anyway, I had to take a lot of other courses because they wouldn't recognize a lot of things I had taken earlier. So I was in some, but the way it worked out, I had to take 3 or 4 graduate level courses. So I was taking 500 and maybe even a 600 level course, because I had already had certain courses, and they wouldn't let me go back in there. It made it kind of tough in order to give me that degree. But I took those courses, and I remember I was in a course with a guy named Jack Jones, who gave me a D when I was in my 20s, and I thought, I'm going to get a higher grade in this course than Jack Jones, and I did. I got an A+ in this course. I thought, just for the heck of it, because Jack was sitting there as a student, and he was my instructor. See, I was a physical education major, and he taught first aid and athletic injuries, and he gave me a D years and years and years ago when I was a student there. And then all of a sudden, I'm in this graduate level course of exercise physiology, quite tough, and there's Jack sitting there. And I thought, Jack Jones and me in the same class as students, all right. said, let's go. So I thought, I'm coming out of here with an A, Jack. I don't know what you're going to get. And I don't know what he got, but I thought, you're going to get any higher than me this time, Jack. He was a good guy. I got a D because I deserved it.
Right. Okay.
That's all that was.
They haven't gotten a degree, then what happens to you?
Well, they called me and said, well, before getting that degree, I had to do practice teaching. And what I did, I got assigned to Kalamazoo Central High School. And that was rough. I had grades 9 through 12, boys and girls mixed, 5 hours of phys ed. And the instructor, he just said, you got him. And then I never saw him again for the entire semester, ever. So they were worse than any basic trainees. They swore at me. Yeah, regularly.
Did it help you to have had the drill sergeant experience?
It did. Plus, I was in great shape, and I knew the sport, the games. Anyway, I did survive that and get my degree, and then I'd gotten in with the ROTC people and got invited to their functions. So I went there with my wife, and I just went down to see them since I told them I was there on active duty. So they said, you can work here afterwards if you want in the ROTC department. We've got a position for you. Then I got a call one night from Department of the Army and said, have you ever been to Berlin? I thought, oh. So I said no. I thought, oh, I hope this is it. And then they said, yeah, we can get you orders to Berlin. So I went down to the ROTC the next day and said, I can't come here. I'm going to be on orders to Berlin. They said, oh yeah, go. He said, we know. So I went. Then I got assigned to Berlin Brigade.
All right.
Yeah.
Describe what that duty was like.
Well, it started off bad. I got there, went to headquarters, and they said, 40th Armor. He said, there's no position for you. But they were lying. There was tell you like it is, there was an E6 that they liked, and he had another year to go. They said the position's filled. He was in my position, and I was E7, platoon sergeant. But he was. I met him later. So I said, well, I'm a phys ed major. Can I work in recreation services? They had gyms. They had a fantastic physical education thing. They had a recreation thing for the soldiers. They had gym. They had 3 gymnasiums. They had indoor tennis courts, Olympic-sized pool where they trained for the 36 Olympics. And they actually had 2 pools, and they had these gyms. They had a boxing team. They had a golf course, running teams. So they said, we've got a job here for you. So I got a job in the athletics and recreation part of the Army, and was in, I can't remember the name of the company. I was in service company, which handles all these kind of services anyway. And they said that I outranked the NCO who was in charge of the whole thing. He said, would that be a problem? I said, no, that's okay. It doesn't matter to me. I just wanted the job. I just didn't want to go what was known as the zone. He said, we'll have to send you to the zone. That meant West Germany, down to a tank company. I said, I want to stay in Berlin. So I got this job here. And the 2 main things that I did was, in addition to being in charge of 25 civilians and soldiers. Because there was a lot of civilians that worked in these facilities. So I mainly worked with the boxing team and became a judge for the boxing matches and organized various running teams that competed in Berlin with the soldiers. And they really liked that because no one really helped the boxing team before. Because they thought they were getting away with something, special privileges. And no one ever organized the running teams because nobody cared and nobody knew what running even was. They were just there for the football, basketball, and other kinds of sports, mainly for the dependents, just the children of the soldiers. That was their big thing. And I could care less, even though I did have a boy who was 10 or so, who played on the football, on the DYA, Dependent Youth Association football team, but I organized these soldiers into running teams, and I had some of the best runners. I had state champions from America that were in the Army, and I organized them, and we competed against the English, the French, the German police, just won everything. Just they were amazed. They said, you never compete before. I said, yeah, well, I'm interested in running. And I ran myself there, too. I ran in the Spandau Marathon twice. Spandau being a very famous place,
right,
because at the time, Rudolf Hess was there, was in that prison, and we had to send, we rotated the guards
right,
with the Russians at the Spandau prison. The infantry handled that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, were the units assigned to Berlin? Are those sort of relatively elite? Did they pick the people carefully who went there?
Yeah, you couldn't be there if you had any type of disciplinary action, and you can only serve in Berlin once. You couldn't keep going back to Berlin because that was your choice duty.
Yeah. Why was Berlin such a special place to serve?
Well, because the post was right in the contiguous area of Berlin, with, of course, the wall being around and up and active all the time that I was there. But it was right there in a huge, one of the most wonderful cities on earth. It was both for its historical significance and the things to do. It was just unlimited. One of the best zoos in the world, and the shopping and the barracks and everything. And the places, the family housing was just super. Oh, there was nothing like it. The living conditions anywhere else in the military, and you lived there free. And there was just so much to do. It was just hard to squeeze it all in. There was just activities all over the city. It was they just do so much.
And did you get a chance to go over to East Berlin?
Yeah, you could. I went there with my wife, and I had to be in uniform. I could drive through Checkpoint Charlie, and we'd spend the entire day there. You had to be out by a certain hour, I think maybe 8 o'clock at night. And then, but you had to be very careful of what you bought and changing your money, because you're not allowed to bring money in there. You have to take your West German marks over there and change them for East German at a rate of 1 to 1. But then after I'd done that a couple of times, I knew they wouldn't search you, because the East Germans aren't allowed to touch you, or even, you don't even have to answer them if they ask you anything, because you don't recognize the East German army. You only recognize the Russian army. As far as the Americans were concerned, they were illegal, the Bobos. And so then from then on, I went down to the Hauptbahnhof down in West Berlin, changed my dollars to East German marks, and there was a rate of 9 to 1. Sure beat 1 to 1.
Yep.
So then we would go over to East Berlin. I just had all kinds of money. We would go there and after we'd shop and buy some things that we could conceal in our car, and or on our person. We would go over the family and to their best hotel, which was on Alexanderplatz, right 50 yards away from the big television tower, to the big Stadt Hotel. And go in there, and if there was a line, if they saw me in uniform, they would usher me to the head of the line, which embarrassed me, but anyway.
What was this, for the hotel restaurant? Or
Yeah. And the hotel restaurant was just superb. We would go there in the restaurant and order the best thing on the menu, a type of filet mignon, the best wines they had from Hungary. We would spend about 100 and some marks, but it was at 9 to 1, it was nothing.
Yeah.
I remember we had 5 people waiting on our table, and they were, like they are even now in Germany, dressed, black and white shirt, black pants, and men and women. And then we would be in there, and then we would have a flaming Alaska or something on that order for dessert, and it was just the finest thing. We have never eaten, probably in our entire life, like we did that, and we haven't since, simply because it's hard to duplicate that in today's world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And then we would afterwards, we would have 2 or 3 brandies, and it was just, the finest. We would, they even had Courvoisier and the imported brandies, but they were Russian brandies, and brandies from the East were just excellent also. Yeah. And then giving them a very, very large tip. That's probably why I got escorted to the head of the line, which really wasn't anything at that exchange rate.
Yep.
But they just thanked us going out that restaurant. But it was sad. The whole thing, the whole day was just sad because of the people that were there under communism. We brightened the day of a few of them, but it was just, it was depressing.
Yeah, physically, what did East Berlin look like as opposed to West Berlin?
It looked like, it looked in 1920. It looked just like that, except for the hotel and the television tower. Other than that, it was 1920. The buildings hadn't been cleaned, and they stone brick buildings get a coating of something on it that makes them look dark.
Right.
And if they're not sandblasted or scrubbed in some manner and lightened up, they just get darker and darker. And they've been that way since the 20s, since the start of the building of the Third Reich, and then the coming of communism. And it was, of course, under communism. We'd see Russian soldiers, they always in uniform. And they were invariably short and dark, meaning they were conscripts from the eastern parts of Russia, not the people from Moscow.
And not European Russia, yeah.
Yep. The eastern, or the western Russians. They were from the east. And of course there was a lot of East German soldiers too. And then I was in uniform. Yeah.
All right.
So,
now, how long did you get to stay in Berlin?
oh, I extended 1 year, so I stayed there 4 years. Yeah.
And so then when did you leave? What year?
I left there in 1979
Okay.
with orders to go to Virginia Military Institute as an instructor in the ROTC department. And I did go there and took over from another E8. I was on E8 list. I had made E8 yet. And we rented a place out in the countryside there for my family, and we went to my boy tours and started school. And by then we had a little daughter who was born in Berlin, and she started at grade school right down there. And my wife got a job there at the grade school with her degree. And I started teaching in the ROTC department, and I had the freshmen and sophomores for armor subjects, tank driving, tank communications, and tank gunnery. And the captain in our little armor section had, he taught tactics and related subjects to the juniors and the seniors. There were just 3 of us, or 4 of us, because there was a supply sergeant, 2 in our section, in the tank section, and there was a major who was in charge. And occasionally he taught a class of mine, as he said, to keep his hand in the game. And he knew that he shouldn't go for 2 or 3 years without teaching a class. So once in a while he would teach one of my classes and just to get up in front of the company. They were all in uniform, and I would organize my class, and the class leader would come forward in their gray uniforms and call the class to attention and salute and report that so many cadets were present for instruction. I'd return a salute and tell them to take their seats, and we would start. We taught them tank driving. We had 5 tanks out in a field that belonged to some farmer, leased his area, and we drove those tanks around there and knocked down trees and took the track off, put the track back on, and in essence taught these cadets how to drive tanks and how to communicate, because we were in communications, of course, while the tank was moving. Yeah, and we had these 5 tanks, and we taught classes out there, and then we went to a firing range at one of the tanks, Fort A.P. Hill, somebody out of history, and some other. It wasn't at Fort Lee. Anyway, we did fire the coaxial machine gun, which is a 7.62 NATO round, but that's all you could fire at that type of range. But you could simulate, you could look through the sights and pull the trigger, and the fact that the main gun didn't fire at something 1,000 meters away, which it was the coaxial machine gun, it was good practice. You learned the basics of tank gunnery like that.
Was this a highly motivated bunch of students?
They were extremely highly motivated. One of the students was the son of the Secretary of the Army. His name was John Marsh, and John Marsh was the Secretary of the Army. And they were just excellent students. Some of them were marathon runners, and I talked to them, of course, about my experiences with that. because while I was there, I went to Washington, D.C., and I ran the Marine Corps Marathon. And that was another exciting experience. And we were doing a lot of running with the ROTC department, with the colonel and all the officers. And they liked running in groups, and the colonel would tell me that he would ask me if I minded that he ran with me if I wouldn't run too fast. So it was nice. And he would tell me also while we were running that my son, who was in his wife's math class in the high school, his wife was the math teacher, was causing some problems for his wife in the high school. So I said, I'll take care of that. So we did. So it was a rather intimate group, all working together in the ROTC department.
Now, was this your last assignment? Or
Right. From there, I went to Fort Lee, Virginia, and I processed out there. The interesting thing about that was they did try to talk me into claiming I had some kind of disability, and I had to keep telling them that I'd spent some time in the hospital because I hurt my back one time taking off a track on a tank, changing a sprocket. But other than that, I was in fine shape. So I just ran the Marine Corps Marathon. There's nothing wrong with me. But they said they just wouldn't let me out of there until they made sure that I didn't have any claim for any kind of compensation for disability. So as of all these years I've been retired, I've not had any claim for any kind of disability.
So what year then did you get out?
In 81, because I went in 61.
Okay.
And I get out.
And then you retired out of the military. Did you go into any other line of work at that point? Or what
Well, I
did you do?
came back to Grand Rapids. We had a house built. I'd been saving my money, and we had the majority of the payment already saved up. And then I did get a job with Kentwood Schools here in Grand Rapids as a supervisor of the custodians, and I had 20 custodians. And I stayed there for 2.5 years at Kentwood High School and then the two middle schools, Crestwood and Valleywood, Crestwood and Valleywood. About half of the employees there worked with me, and the other half worked against me. They were union. They didn't want anybody from the Army telling them anything. I didn't take it personal because it wouldn't matter who the boss was, who was the supervisor. They were not going to cooperate. So I did what I thought was the best thing, and then after 2.5 years, I started getting into rental houses, and I told them I was going to resign, and that was the end of that. And I actually made a lot more money with the rental houses because, as I said before, we were quite good with money, and we paid one off and bought some others, and I bought 3 of them, 3 houses in 1 week. It was really before the housing boom.
Right.
Houses were cheap. I bought one for $20,000, one for $21,000, and another for $27,000. And those were good houses, and I sold them for, the one I bought for $20,000, just later on I sold it for $121,000. I bought it from Marty Redder. He's in the newspapers.
Yes.
He's well known. I like the guy. I've been to some of his seminars on rental housing. He's can give you some good advice. I went to a seminar by a person named David Grezik. He has a book at the time. Just taught me so much. Just really, really taught me everything about being a landlord, about acquiring property. Just learned the whole thing. Yep. And I still use those principles today.
All right.
And how to do this. Now I got to where I owned 16 houses. I rent to everybody. One time I had 6 black families. I can't say that there was any more trouble there than the Mexicans that rented from me or the white people. And I rent to a variety of people today.
Okay.
And currently I have 10 houses I rent.
All right. To look back over your time in the military, how many years all told were you in?
I was in 20 years.
Okay. Over the course of that time, how do you think the Army itself changed?
Well, they've changed a lot. They've changed the PT test. And I'm not much for change. unless it improves things. I didn't think they needed to bother themselves with that. Had a good test, and they never needed to change it. But when I came in, people were still wearing, some of them were wearing brown boots, and I was lucky I didn't get I got a pair of black boots. But I guess that was a change. And they changed the name. They're not trainees anymore. What they call them? What do they call them? Oh, I don't know whether they call them soldiers or what they call them. But I thought, you don't need to start giving someone an elevated title when they don't know anything. And there's so much that you don't know when you come in the Army. It's just amazing. It's just, there's just so much to learn if you're a trainee or a recruit. Yeah. So
Do you think that Vietnam had an effect on the Army as a whole? Was it a different kind of place, or were there issues they had later that they didn't have earlier?
In the 60s has an effect on really how we live today. There's more of a laissez-faire attitude. Prior to Vietnam and prior to those years, which I like those years, but I survived them, and I don't think the country really did. I think we're a little bit too lax with our finances. We are, as I don't know who it was. The person who played 007, who was it?
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery said, being English, he said, Americans have too many rights. And I thought, you got it. That's a fact. It's just too easy going, too much laissez-faire, too easy with their money. It's the military, those years, we didn't really ever pull out of that. The people who were on those drugs became parents, and they didn't become very good parents. There was just, and that's, the problem with the Mexican.
I was asking really more specifically about just within the Army itself. Was the Army a different place or a different institution by the late 70s than it had been back in the early 60s?
Well, I have to say that the Army today is doing an excellent job at accomplishing whatever they're set out to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're just as good as we were, positively, in doing what they're set out to do. I think that they've just served in Iraq and just as well as possibly could.
Do you think they kind of maintained a certain level of quality, at least with the units that you were with during the whole time you were there?
They're being paid a lot more, but they're just as good. The special forces and these things, you just can't run that show if it's run poorly. I think that there was some in the initial invasion of Iraq. There was some people who were caught off guard and were ambushed by Saddam Hussein's army. That they should have had security, more security. They should have been taking care of their weapons. But these people were truck drivers, and even when I was in the Army, they were truck drivers, but they really should know that in a dangerous situation, you're still an infantryman. You need to know where your protective mask's in. You need to know that their weapon's clean and ready to fire, because some of them didn't during this ambush. And then you had the incident with the coal, where they're sitting in Yemen, which I wouldn't ever consider under any circumstances a friendly port. And then they let these people come up there in a rowboat and blow a big hole in the side of their ship. And I thought, where was the security? I'd have opened up on those people. If they got, the worst thing would have happened is they'd have shot 2 guys in a rowboat dead because they got too close to their ship, and they could have done, the Secretary of State couldn't handle that problem, rather than trying to figure out what happened, why we got the big hole and 17 people killed with a big hole in the side of the coal. And they just needed to be more alert, and if you're on, you have to be on wartime footing since you're on a warship. So I equate them with the time when I was standing there beside the helicopter, when the helicopter was vulnerable. I was on guard with my weapon, and it was loaded, and I had the safety on, but I was ready to fire. If anybody come out of the dark, they'd have been dead. I'd have shot them right there, and we'd have talked about it later on. And that's what the Corps should have done. They should have opened fire when they got close.
All right.
Yep.
And it's finally here. What effect overall do you think your career in the service had on you? I mean, how were you different when you came out than you were when you went in?
Well, I was a lot more well-educated and combined the things that I'd learned through my reading and through school. And I did have excellent instructors at junior college and at Western Michigan University, but the instructors they had in the Army were just excellent too, equivalent of the college instructors. But of course, I was older and more learned, and then I had 2 children and a wife, and I, through good husbanding of our money, always had a lot of money, or a good portion of money in reserve, because you never know what was going to happen. And that's how it is in the military. You never know what's going to happen. And don't anticipate that it's always going to be good. If something really bad happens, what are your actions going to be, and are you going to be ready? When I was on the tank, I always thought, what's going to happen if the tank gets hit with an RPG or with another enemy tank? And I thought, I'm glad I'm the tank commander, and not down inside as the gunner or the driver, because they probably won't get out. But anyway, I was always thinking about what we'll do if we do get hit. And that's really how I was in civilian life, in how I manage things. And I'm still that way today, watching the weather and just I get maintenance. See, that's another thing. I have 2 cars in the car in Germany where I spend the summers, but I make sure that the maintenance is done on those vehicles. And just like you do in the military, you do maintain those vehicles, because if it's not maintained and you get caught short, you'll be embarrassed, and you may get reduced in rank or have an Article 15 or trouble will be started. But now I just maintain my house and my equipment, and I try to maintain these rental houses the best I can. And most of that is from the military, just maintaining everything, keeping your stuff looking good.
All right then.
Yep.
All right. Well, and thank you very much for coming on and tell us your story today.
Well, thank you.
All right.